The year was 1848, and Baton Rouge was a place divided between quiet southern charm and the unmistakable shadow of something darker. Plantations lined the edges of the Mississippi River, their grand white columns hiding stories no visitor ever truly saw. Behind those walls, whispers carried further than truth, and fear traveled faster than the wind that passed through the sugar-cane fields. This story begins on one such plantation, a place locals still refused to name even generations later. They called it simply the House on the Bend. The house belonged to a wealthy landowner, a man who kept to himself and who ruled his land with a silent but iron grip. His name appears in no surviving record with certainty, almost as if the city collectively decided to erase him. But they all remembered the night he brought home a group of newly purchased enslaved people. There was nothing unusual about that at the time. What was unusual was what happened after. Within days of their arrival, strange incidents began to ripple across the property. The cattle refused to graze near the old well. Dogs howled through the night for no reason anyone could explain. Workers reported soft footsteps in places that should have been empty, and doors that slowly opened despite being latched shut only moments before. But the most unsettling part was the way the new enslaved workers behaved. They did not speak unless forced to. They rarely made eye contact. They seemed especially terrified of one section of the property, the oldest part of the land, the place where the original slave quarters had burned down almost 20 years earlier. No one had touched that ground since. It was said to be cursed, and even the landowner kept his distance. One of the enslaved men, a young man named Samuel, became the center of the entire mystery. He was quiet, observant, and always looking over his shoulder as if something followed him. The overseer reported that Samuel refused to sleep inside the quarters. Every night he would slip outside and sit next to the river, staring across the dark water until sunrise. The overseer tried to punish him for it once. Only once, because after that night the overseer swore he saw something standing behind Samuel by the river. Something tall and thin with no clear shape. Something watching. He never punished Samuel again. Rumors spread quickly among the other enslaved people. They said Samuel wasn't just running from a slave trader or searching for family. They believed he carried something with him, not an object but a presence. Something attached to him long before he ever arrived at the plantation. Something that had followed him across states, across owners, across years. The women whispered that the thing by the river was not protecting him. It was waiting for him. One night, in the thick heat of August, the landowner awoke to scratching sounds along the wooden walls of the house. At first he thought it was an animal searching for food. Then he heard soft, rhythmic tapping. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. He lit a lantern and followed the sound to the back door. When he opened it, the scratching stopped. The night air was still, too still. Even the cicadas were silent. On the ground before him, drawn into the dirt, was a perfect circle surrounded by symbols he had never seen before. And standing at the far edge of the yard was Samuel, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. The landowner demanded to know what he was doing, but Samuel didn't answer. He simply stepped backward, disappearing into the darkness like a shadow melting into deeper shadow. The next morning, Samuel was gone. No one had seen him leave, and no footprints were found leading away from the plantation. The landowner sent riders to search for him. They combed the riverbanks. They checked nearby towns. Nothing. But on the 3rd day, something appeared at the burned-down section of the property. Something the workers discovered before dawn. It was Samuel's shirt, folded neatly at the center of the scorched earth, untouched by dew, as if someone had placed it there moments before the first worker arrived. The landowner suspected witchcraft or rebellion, or something that could threaten his control. He gathered the enslaved people and demanded answers. No one spoke, but one elderly woman, known for her wisdom, finally raised her head. She told him Samuel was not running from the plantation. He was running from a curse placed on his bloodline generations before. A curse that bound a spirit to his family, a spirit that fed on suffering, growing stronger with every tragedy it witnessed. She warned the landowner that the spirit was not here for Samuel anymore. It had found a new place to anchor itself. The landowner ordered her whipped for speaking such things, but the whipping never happened. When the overseer tried to strike her, the whip cracked sharply, but before it could touch her, it split cleanly in half as though sliced by an invisible blade. Everyone froze. The overseer dropped the handle, his hands trembling uncontrollably. That night another worker vanished, this time a woman named Ruth. She had been assigned to work in the kitchen. The cook claimed Ruth had stepped outside to gather firewood, but never returned. Again, no footprints were found. Again, only one object remained at the site where she disappeared, her headscarf tied neatly around a small mound of dirt. Panic spread through the plantation. The landowner sent for help from town, convinced someone was stealing his workers. But when the sheriff arrived, he found something the landowner had not noticed. The places where Samuel and Ruth vanished were nearly identical in shape, as if carved into the land with deliberate precision. Perfect circles, almost the same size as the one found behind the house weeks earlier. The sheriff called for more deputies. They searched the grounds thoroughly, and for a moment it seemed the strange occurrences slowed. Until the night everything changed. A storm rolled over Baton Rouge, the kind of storm that made even the bravest men pray. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the fields in flashes of white. The enslaved people huddled together inside their quarters, whispering prayers, clutching hands. But even the storm could not drown out the sound that came next. A low humming vibration, not thunder, not wind. It came from the burned section of the property, rising like a chant too deep to be human. The landowner, armed with a lantern and a shotgun, marched toward the sound, shouting for the sheriff to follow. But as he approached the scorched ground, the chanting grew louder, vibrating through the earth itself. His lantern flickered wildly, the air thickened with heat, and then he saw them, figures, dozens of them, standing in a circle. Their bodies were translucent, shimmering like heat waves. Their faces were twisted with pain, eyes hollow, arms limp. The landowner recognized some of them. Former enslaved workers who had died on the property over the last decade. Men and women whose graves lay behind the plantation. He dropped the shotgun. His voice broke as he screamed for someone to help him. The sheriff later told townspeople he saw nothing, but he also never returned to that plantation. By morning, the landowner was missing. His boots were found at the edge of the scorched earth, arranged neatly side by side. But the man himself was never seen again. The plantation was abandoned shortly after. Workers were relocated. The property was eventually sold, but no buyer ever stayed more than a season. By the time the Civil War ended, the house had decayed into a skeleton of rotting wood and collapsing beams. Locals spent decades telling stories about what truly happened. Some said Samuel returned for revenge, others believed a curse swallowed the land whole, but the most accepted theory among the old families of Baton Rouge was far stranger. They said the spirit attached to Samuel never wanted a single person. It wanted the land itself, a place where suffering had seeped deep into the soil, a place where fear could feed it forever. Even today, residents claim that if you stand near the bend of the old riverbank at night, you can hear footsteps behind you, slow, measured, and when you turn around, the field looks different for a moment. You might see flickers of old wooden structures, faint silhouettes moving in the darkness, and if you listen closely, you may hear 3 soft taps on the ground. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, the same rhythm from 1008. 148. And then the field becomes empty again, but your heartbeat will not.